São Paulo, Brazil, 2012. The spring air hung heavy with tension as one of Brazil's most powerful business dynasties faced its darkest hour. Marcos Matsunaga, heir to the Yoki food empire, vanished without a trace on the eve of a billion-dollar merger that would have cemented his family's legacy. As police helicopters scoured the city's sprawling landscape, his widow's tears captivated a nation. Her grief splashed across every newspaper from Rio to Manaus. But beneath the headlines of a possible corporate kidnapping lay a truth far more sinister than any business rivalry could spawn. The Matsunaga name had been synonymous with success since the 1960s, when Yoshizo Kitano, a determined Japanese immigrant, transformed a humble flour mill into what would become Brazil's food manufacturing giant, Yoki. The company's very name, crafted from its founder's initials, became a symbol of immigrant perseverance in Brazil's competitive market. Into this empire of success and expectation was born Marcos Matsunaga, a child who would never know hunger, but would starve for something far more fundamental: acceptance. Despite inheriting his grandfather's business acumen and multiplying the company's profits several times over, Marcos couldn't buy what he desperately craved: genuine connection. Behind the executive's tailored suits and corner office lay a man wrestling with deep-seated insecurities. Standing at just 5 feet 6 inches, carrying excess weight since childhood, and peering through thick-lensed glasses, Marcos developed a personality as defensive as it was demanding. Former employees would later tell investigators about his controlling nature, his need to dominate every room he entered, perhaps compensating for years of schoolyard rejection. The bachelor life of one of Brazil's wealthiest men wasn't the glamorous playboy existence one might expect. While his bank account grew, his personal life remained bankrupt. Luxury escorts filled his evenings, but the emptiness remained. Those who knew him described a man who could orchestrate million-dollar deals but couldn't navigate basic human relationships. His first marriage came not from the heart, but from family pressure and desperation. Like many arrangements built on shaky foundations, it was a union doomed from the start. His wife, whose identity remains carefully guarded in Brazil's social circles, entered the marriage, hoping time would soften his sharp edges. Instead, she found herself trapped in a gilded cage with a man whose wealth couldn't mask his wounded soul. But it was his second marriage that would ultimately lead to front-page headlines and a story that would shake Brazil's elite to its core. As investigators would soon discover, sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in corporate boardrooms, but in the intimate spaces we call home. Life has a way of crafting stories more twisted than fiction, and the tale of Alice and Marcos Matsunaga would prove to be one of Brazil's most compelling dark romances. While his first marriage crumbled under the weight of his infidelities, Marcos made no pretense of discretion. His digital footprints led regularly to high-end escort websites where São Paulo's wealthy could discreetly arrange companionship. It was on one of these platinum member platforms that he first saw her, Alice, a striking blonde whose photos promised sophistication beyond her 26 years. But behind Alice's carefully curated online presence lay a past that read like a Brazilian noir film. Born into the notorious favelas of São Paulo, she grew up in the shadow of violence. Her childhood home was a battleground of empty bottles and her mother's rotating cast of violent boyfriends. The walls of their tiny apartment held secrets of abuse that would haunt her dreams well into adulthood. There was no father figure in sight, just a space on her birth certificate where a name should have been. Her escape from the favelas was both desperate and calculated. Armed with determination and survival instincts honed by years of navigating danger, she clawed her way through nursing school. The hospice where she worked became both salvation and torment. Each death she witnessed reopened childhood wounds of loss and abandonment. The stark white halls couldn't contain her ambitions or heal her trauma. Law school beckoned like a lighthouse of legitimacy. Alice saw it as her ticket to reinvention, a way to transform from victim to advocate. She scored impressively on the entrance exams, but the monthly tuition fees might as well have been in the millions for someone with her background. That's when she made a decision that would alter the course of Brazilian criminal history. The escort world Alice entered was far removed from her favela past. She learned to move in high society, to speak their language, to mirror their mannerisms. Her profile on the exclusive escort site was craftily designed to attract the elite. No trace of her humble origins, just the promise of refined companionship. Marcos became a regular client, showering her with designer gifts and whisking her away to five-star hotels. But Alice wasn't just another escort to him. She represented everything his first wife wasn't: young, beautiful, and seemingly in awe of him. What Marcos couldn't see was that Alice had mastered the art of becoming whatever men wanted her to be, a survival skill learned in childhood. Their courtship played out like a modern fairy tale, carefully sanitized for public consumption. The story they crafted, a chance meeting in a trendy São Paulo cafe, was repeated so often they almost believed it themselves. Marcos filed for divorce with the same decisiveness he used in corporate takeovers. Within months, Alice transformed from escort to fiancée, her past scrubbed clean by expensive PR firms and the power of Marcos's influence. But fairy tales, especially ones built on carefully constructed lies, have a way of unraveling. And on the warm Brazilian nights, as Alice lay beside her millionaire prince, the ghosts of her past refused to stay buried. The Matsunaga mansion stood like a modern fortress in São Paulo's most exclusive neighborhood, its pristine walls concealing dark passions that would later become evidence in Brazil's most notorious crime scene. When Alice crossed that threshold as the new Mrs. Matsunaga, the cold reception from her in-laws barely masked their thinly veiled suspicions. They saw through the carefully constructed facade of the fairy tale wedding, the cascading white dress, the tower of champagne glasses, the orchestrated perfection of it all. Behind closed doors, the mansion revealed Marcos's obsessions. The wine cellar, a temperature-controlled labyrinth, housed millions in rare vintages. But it was the secret armory that would later fascinate criminal psychologists. Walls lined with gleaming weapons, from antique Japanese katanas to modern hunting rifles. Each piece, meticulously maintained, told a story of power and precision. The couple's inability to conceive naturally became an obsession that matched the intensity of Marcos's collecting. After multiple failed IVF attempts, their daughter's birth seemed like destiny's blessing. She became their living treasure, pampered in a nursery that cost more than most Brazilian homes. But parenthood couldn't bridge the psychological chasm growing between them. It was their shared interest in hunting that would later make headlines across South America. Alice's enthusiasm for the sport raised eyebrows among those who knew her background. Former escorts who later spoke to investigators noted how she had never shown interest in weapons before meeting Marcos. Yet suddenly, she was handling rifles with surprising precision, learning to track prey through Brazil's dense forests. The couple's hunting ritual became increasingly elaborate. Alice proved particularly adept at the butchering process, handling hunting knives with an expertise that would later haunt investigators. Together, they would dismember their prizes with surgical precision, skills that would eventually serve a far darker purpose. Their home became a monument to death in various forms. Taxidermied trophies stared with glass eyes from every wall, while venomous snakes slithered in custom terrariums. The staff whispered about how Alice would stand for hours, watching the serpents strike at their prey, her face betraying no emotion. She had transformed from a law student who once cared for the dying into someone who seemed to find comfort in dealing with death. Marcos had finally found his perfect match, or so he thought. In Alice, he saw a reflection of his own fascination with power over life and death. Their daughter, playing innocently among the mounted heads and coiled snakes, became the sole witness to their increasingly macabre partnership. But beneath this carefully curated tableau of domestic bliss, pressure was building. The very skills they had honed together, the precision with weapons, the knowledge of anatomy, the comfort with blood, would soon serve a purpose neither their wealthy neighbors nor the society pages could have imagined. In the end, the hunting grounds would shift from the forest to their own home, and the prey would not be a wild game. São Paulo, May 2012. The city's financial district hummed with whispers of what would be Brazil's biggest food industry acquisition. Marcos Matsunaga stood at the precipice of joining South America's billionaire class. But fate had other plans. The new high-rise apartment the Matsunagas occupied was a glass and steel monument to success, its panoramic windows offering a god's-eye view of the city Marcos was about to conquer. But while he orchestrated his billion-dollar symphony from boardroom to boardroom, Alice drifted through their minimalist spaces like a ghost, the emptiness of their 47th floor sanctuary becoming her constant companion. The timeline that would later fascinate investigators began on May 19, 2012. The security cameras in their luxury building captured Marcos entering at 7:43 p.m., briefcase in hand, his last recorded movement. What happened in the hours that followed would become the subject of Brazil's most intense manhunt. Alice's delayed reporting of his disappearance, waiting nearly 24 hours, initially raised no red flags. After all, billion-dollar deals don't follow normal business hours. But when detectives learned that Marcos had missed not one but two crucial meetings, the case took on a new urgency. In Brazil's high-stakes business world, missing such meetings was akin to a priest skipping Easter Mass. The kidnapping theory dominated the first phase of the investigation. Teams of specialists monitored phone lines and bank accounts, waiting for ransom demands that never came. The federal police's anti-kidnapping unit set up a command center. But as hours turned to days, their monitors remained silent. The investigation's first major twist came when Alice, clutching her daughter's hand, made a theatrical appearance at her in-laws' estate. Through carefully timed tears, she unveiled a tale of marital betrayal centered around a woman named Natasha Villa Lima. The private investigator's photos she produced showed intimate dinners, stolen kisses, and clandestine meetings at upscale hotels. But seasoned detectives noted something peculiar. Alice's composed delivery of this information contrasted sharply with her earlier displays of grief. Her detailed knowledge of her husband's infidelity, complete with photographic evidence, seemed almost too well prepared, too perfectly packaged. The surveillance photos themselves told an interesting story, not just of Marcos's infidelity, but of the weeks leading up to his disappearance. In them, he appeared distracted, constantly checking his phone, and his usual commanding presence diminished. Was he sensing something? Did the man who built an empire on careful calculation see something coming? What no one knew yet was that these photos, meant to paint Marcos as the villain in a simple tale of infidelity, would soon become crucial evidence in a much darker story. The very detailed documentation of his movements, intended to prove his unfaithfulness, would instead reveal patterns that would lead investigators down an unexpected path. As May drew to a close, the absence of ransom demands forced investigators to consider a more sinister possibility, that this wasn't a kidnapping at all, and that the answer to Marcos Matsunaga's disappearance might lie much closer to home. Here's the enhanced version, focusing on the investigative breakthrough and psychological elements. The thread that would unravel the Matsunaga case wasn't the missing billion-dollar deal, but a series of high-end restaurant receipts. Like breadcrumbs leading to truth, they showed Marcos parading his new escort-turned-girlfriend, Natasha Lima, through the same exclusive establishments where the maitre d's still greeted Alice by name. The choreographed humiliation wasn't lost on investigators. It painted a picture of a man who had forgotten the cardinal rule of wealth: discretion. Natasha Lima's story eerily mirrored Alice's own past. Another escort profile on the same website, another expensive car gifted, another profile mysteriously disappeared. It was as if Marcos was trying to recreate his fantasy, replacing an aging Cinderella with a newer model. The 150,000 reais he paid to have Natasha's profile removed from the escort site would later seem like a deadly form of déjà vu. But it was a pizza delivery that would crack the case wide open. May 19, 2012, 8:17 p.m. security footage shows Marcos Matsunaga, still in his business suit, descending in the private elevator of their luxury high-rise. 8:24 p.m. He returns with 2 pizza boxes from Famiglia Mancini, São Paulo's most exclusive pizzeria. The cameras capture his final moments, the last time Marcos Matsunaga would be seen alive. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a jogger in Embu das Artes, a quiet suburb 50 kilometers from Sao Paulo's center. The discovery of black garbage bags, their contents spilling a grotesque story across the morning dew, transformed a missing persons case into Brazil's most sensational murder investigation. The forensic report read like a horror novel. The precision of the dismemberment stunned even seasoned pathologists. Each cut was executed with surgical accuracy, following anatomical landmarks that only someone with intimate knowledge of butchery would recognize. The killer hadn't just taken a life. They had applied a craftsman's expertise to its disposal. But it was the elevator footage from the following morning that would become the prosecution's smoking gun. Alice Matsunaga, dressed immaculately in designer workout wear, struggled with 3 large suitcases. The security cameras captured every labored step, every pause to adjust her grip, every moment of what investigators now knew was a macabre journey. The weight of evidence finally broke her composure in the interrogation room. As Detective Paulo Santos would later testify, her transformation from grieving widow to confessing killer came not with the murder weapon, not with the forensics, but with a simple security tape showing those heavy suitcases. Her confession painted a picture of a marriage corroded by contempt. Marcos, she claimed, had weaponized her past, wielding her former life as an escort like a blade, cutting deeper with each argument. The pizza delivery that final night wasn't a peace offering. It was just another stage for humiliation. The truth emerged in layers, each more disturbing than the last. In the fluorescent-lit interrogation rooms of São Paulo's homicide division, Alice Matsunaga's story began to unravel like poorly stitched fabric. Her initial narrative was carefully constructed. An abused wife, pushed to the brink by a controlling husband who weaponized her past. She painted Marcos as a monster who isolated her, monitored her movements, and threatened to take their daughter. The shooting, she claimed, happened in a fog of fear and rage after he struck her. But forensic science tells no lies. The bullet's trajectory told a different story, one of calculated execution rather than desperate self-defense. Dr. Maria Santos, the lead forensic pathologist, testified that the angle suggested Marcos was seated, possibly at their dining table, completely unaware of his impending death. The pizza boxes on the table, barely touched, suggested a scene of domestic normalcy shattered by premeditated violence. But it was what happened after the shooting that would haunt even seasoned court officials. While their young daughter slept mere meters away, Alice methodically dismembered her husband's body. The most chilling evidence came from the lung tissue analysis, microscopic proof that Marcos was still breathing when the dismemberment began. The courtroom fell silent as Dr. Santos explained how air bubbles in the blood vessels indicated conscious suffering in the final moments. The timeline of the private investigator's photos delivered the fatal blow to Alice's defense. The evidence she claimed triggered the killing wasn't even in her possession until after Marcos was dead. Her theatrical presentation of these photos to her in-laws now appeared as a calculated attempt to create an alibi, a smokescreen of spousal betrayal to mask a darker truth. Natasha Lima's testimony painted yet another picture of Marcos, not as an abuser, but as a man trapped and frightened. "He told me Alice wasn't stable," Lima testified, her voice steady. "He was planning to leave for Florida after the billion-dollar deal. He was afraid of what she might do." The prosecution built their case methodically. How Alice had used her nursing knowledge of anatomy and their shared hunting experience to dispose of the body. How she'd waited until their daughter was asleep before acting. How she'd calmly packed her husband's remains into suitcases and disposed of them like common trash. The security footage from their building became the prosecution's coup de grace. There was no evidence of the violent confrontation Alice described, just ordinary elevator trips with pizza delivery, followed by those haunting images of her struggling with the weighted suitcases the next morning. The 20-year sentence she received sparked controversy throughout Brazil. For some, it seemed impossibly lenient for a crime that combined the intimacy of domestic murder with the cold calculation of its cover-up. The judge noted Alice's background and prior clean record as mitigating factors, But many wondered if class privilege had once again tipped the scales of justice. Today, in a cruel twist of fate, Marcos's parents raised their granddaughter in the same mansion where her mother once played princess, its walls still adorned with the hunting trophies that testified to her parents' shared passion for dealing death. The little girl, too young to understand during those fatal days, now grows up with a legacy of questions that may never find satisfying answers.